a half of a page about the Italia with one kind of fuzzy bad photograph, but I was hooked because what I was seeing was a purer form of that Italian design. My name is Scott Marquis. I'm the owner of Triumph Italia number 227. The car was first registered in 1961 and, to the best of our knowledge, spent almost all of its life in Switzerland. I bought it off of a 2-inch square ad in the back of Triumph World. Had the car shipped over to a restoration shop in Seattle. So 1999-2000, you can think of that as we had email. Certainly didn't have the web for finding out things about cars like parts and sources and that sort of thing. Ultimately, the car spent 12 years in restoration, which ended up being a bad thing because it was frustrating to go that long. But it was also good because that was the window of time when the community of enthusiasts and owners began to learn more about the cars. We learned many more things about what part that might have been and what should have been in that car. And there are things that I learned now long after the car's been restored that are right, wrong, and indifferent. And that's both one of the realities of the car, but it's also one of the charms, is that there is no absolute on these cars. And to some extent, even though the values have run up quite high on the cars, no one is yet to the point of worrying a lot about absolute originality, absolute correctness. So what does it mean to have one? It means there's one in my garage. And when I go down and the cover's off and I turn around and there's an Italia sitting there, and it's just a beautiful car. So we're at Concorso Italiano 2019. The exegesis of our having this group here today, I live just south of Seattle, Washington, and the owner and organizer of Concorso, Tom McDowell, lives a bit north of me. There is a Saturday, it's essentially a cars and coffee event during the summers for this area, but it has a heavy focus on more modern exotics, Ferrari, Lamborghini. I had the car there on Italian Day, and there was not a lot of vintage cars there. There were a few, but Tom approached me and said, would you consider bringing this car to Concorso? And I said, this was I believe it was in June or July of 2018. And I said, well, not this year because that's a big undertaking, but perhaps for next year. And he said, are you in touch with other owners, and would you be interested in trying to put together a special class for us? And I said, well, how many cars would you need? And I think at that time he said, I think you need 5 or 7 cars for it to be a solid display. So at that point I began emailing and making phone calls, making sure I understood who the U.S. owners were, what cars we might have the best chance of getting to actually come here. And so we spent most of end of last year and the first part of this year getting that organized. We had 5 other owners in addition to myself who brought their cars, one from Tucson, Arizona, 2 from the LA area, 1 from the San Francisco Bay Area, and 1 car that came over from the UK. And the one thing I will say is that from the minute each one of those 5 owners committed, none of them wavered. They all wanted to be here. And so it would have been tough if we'd lost some cars along the way, but everybody stayed committed and wanted to bring the cars. And this is a special day for me. I've owned my car for 19 years. Until 2 days ago, I had only seen one other Italia in the metal. And so for me, having 6 cars all together and getting to pour over what the differences are and so on and so forth, it's just an amazing experience. Quite unusual, and it isn't easy to pull off. And so, you have to go do that when you see aggregations of cars like this. You have to go see them when they're available, because that's going to be your opportunity. There aren't going to be 5 more chances to see them.
Carrozzeria Speciale. And this is very speciale, in fact, belonging to Ben Cohen. This is a Triumph Italia 2000.
Well, this car was at British Sports Cars in San Luis Obispo. I'm Ben Cohen, Tucson, Arizona, owner of Italia number 52. And I had seen 4 restorations come through that shop over a period of about 11, 12 years. So I walked in and said, you're restoring another one. He said, no, we've been sent this to make it right, and then it's going back to LA for a consignment sale. So we learned who the consignor was, previous person we've dealt with, and within 2 hours we had a deal. Well, we were lucky enough to tracked down the original owner. He was an American serviceman in the Air Force in the Paris region. Ordered the car at Triumph Paris on the Champs-Élysées in early 1960 and picked it up in Turin and drove it back to Paris. Kept it in Paris till 1962 when he moved back to the States and I believe the LA area. Everything in the car is original as he bought it. The steering wheel, the gauges, the seats are pigskin he had done back here in the States. And he kept the car for almost 40 years. It's been reliable. Like I said, I've driven 8,500 miles with only minor hiccups. Doesn't overheat, doesn't use a lot of gas. It's just not terribly fast. Great car, fun to own.
And Ben, tell us, what year is your car?
It's a 1960 Italia 2000.
And these were all Vignale bodied, yes?
Vignale bodied in Turin, designed by Michelotti.
Indeed. And if you'll tell us, how long have you had the car?
I've owned it 5 years and I'm the 6th owner.
Is this pretty much the way you got it, or did you restore it?
I did not restore it, but I changed the color back to the original simple gray.
Good move. And where are you from?
Tucson, Arizona.
And if you didn't think the Italians and the English could get along, here's an example of how well they did. Congratulations to you, a well-deserved third place in class, Ben Cohen from Arizona with his 1960 Triumph Italia 2000. And we'll talk more about Triumph Italias a little bit later on because this is a big anniversary for these cars. And Crystal has a trophy for you.
The guy didn't really want the hassle of selling it, and he just said, it's here, first one that comes and see it, pay the money, takes the car away. And we said, well, we're not really in that position, so okay, thank you very much. I'm Graham Andrews and I'm owner of Italia 82. We got a phone call about 2 weeks later and the guy said, are you still interested in the car? Yes. When we got it back, we then realised that the Italians had tried to repair it, and once we got started we realised that we got a really, really big job. So we just stripped it down to absolutely everything, undone every seam, took the bulkhead out, took the roof off, took the floors out, straightened everything. The metal was all there, not very rusty, but every panel was bent. There was not one panel that wasn't bent. So we then began the restoration of putting it back. We bolted it down on a new frame that we found, a nearly new TR3 frame, and just started from floors, bulkhead, boot, roof, and had to make so many panels. It was unbelievable. That took nearly to the day 2 years to do the metalwork. We had to make door handles, we had to make all the rubbers for the screens, the doors, the seals, the unique little boot handle come light, badges, the list just goes on and on and on. If someone said to me, what are the best comments I've had ever since the car has ever been shown, and I think the paintwork is it just takes everyone's breath away. It's the people I've met through the car which is probably more important to me than the car. We met some great people, made some great friends, and the comments you get is great.
I happened to find this one on the internet, and it had just come up for sale. An individual in England had owned it for several years. Hi, my name is Roger Groves. I am the current and third owner of Triumph Italia 215. She is a wonderful machine. It turned out it was the most original car of the Italias in the world. 215 is the serial number, and when I bought it had 8,600 kilometers from new. And the story that I got was it sat at the Triumph dealer in Milan, Italy for over 20 years in the showroom, and for some reason was sold, and the first owner drove it very little over the next 20, 30 years. It's original except for the paint. Paul, the owner prior to me, had it repainted because it was just falling off. He said he didn't have a choice. And since we've had it, put about 5,000 kilometers on it, which is over a third of its total life. When the car was serviced, once it was in America, I went to the garage in Eugene, Oregon, and I drove it home, which was 1,100 miles for the very first time. And that was a 3-day event, very hot, over 100 degrees, and the car did very well, much better than I did. So I was very impressed, and then since then my wife and I have done several tours. It's very comfortable, runs good, and just looks fantastic, drives excellent for its age. I mean, what more do you want?
My name's Adrian Sinnott. I bought my first Italia in 1982. I still have it in boxes. So I'm here to talk about these ones that people have actually put back together. Well, they were the inspiration of one man, a fellow named Salvatore Ruffino. So he had the Italian distributorship for Triumph. And he thought Triumph could come out with something a little bit more upscale than the TR3. So he went around to various coach builders in Italy asking for submissions when a friend of his in the industry said you have to use Michelotti. He didn't think Michelotti could do it because he was so young at the time. But because of Michelotti's connections with Vignale, they could see that they could not only design the car but do the production for him. And they originally had the blessing of Triumph. Triumph had made an agreement with Ruffino to produce 1,000 of these and put one in every Triumph dealership. But then Leyland bought Triumph and said, we don't want to do that. And this car influenced the TR4. It influenced their Triumph's Le Mans cars. The original TR4 prototype looked almost exactly like this, but as a convertible.
And how many of these built?
There were 2 prototypes, of which the second one still exists, and then 328 cars, so 330 in total.
So 1% of the population is right here in front of you.
There's about 60 on the road today, which is a dramatic increase from over 10 years ago.
No, so this car made its debut and premiere in 1959, yes?
Yes.
How many would you guess are in the United States or in North America?
There used to be more. There's probably about 30 now. But a lot of them went to Europe because most of them came here initially. So,
Lovely. Happy 60th birthday to this wonderful little car, the Triumph Italia 2000.
My mother bought it in 1973. It was at the back of a warehouse, and they kind of were sick of showing it to people, so they wouldn't even get it out for her. I'm Lisa Milne. I'm owner of Italia 239. And when my dad first spotted it, it was out in front. And by the time my mom went to look at it just a few months later, it was in the back. And they said it had been there forever, and nobody actually ever wanted the car. And they said it was $29.95, and she said no thanks, started to walk away, and they said okay, $19.95, and she said write up the paperwork. That was 1973. So she brought it home. It was her daily driver for years, and then she taught me how to drive on it because she said if you can drive this, you can drive anything. And so it was my first car to drive around, although I didn't get to own it. And she kept threatening to sell it. I kept saying, you can't do it. Can't do it. It's our car. It's a fabulous car. It's a beautiful car, etc. So finally, she gave it to me on the proviso I fix it up and not sell it. We did have it about 15 years ago restored because my mom had let it sit for about 15 years. And so they kind of did a top to bottom cleanup of it. The grill was chicken wire, and there was one light that my mother had found and replaced with a Carmen Ghia light. I think that the wheels were too far gone, and so we have different wheels on now. Oh, I love this car. I've always loved this car. And so it's really great to be here in a show with it. Amazing to see others like it, because I'd never seen another one until recently in England. We went to a museum just to see one. It's a beautiful car and it's so unique. It's great fun to drive.
I looked at it and thought, that is the most beautiful car. That will be the Triumph to own one day. My name is Roger Williams. I'm the owner of Triumph Italia number 102. What makes the car special for me is Michelotti's design here just seems almost perfect from any angle. All the proportions and the styling are just perfectly executed in this car. One of the things I was told by the previous owner was that his brother and his father repainted the car in the 60s because the New Mexico sun had cracked the original red paint that had been put on at the Vignale factory, and apparently the paint was very thick and had cracked and glazed in the desert sun there. It was sold new in Italy to an American who brought it home 2 years later to Albuquerque. He sold the car to another airman, to a young fighter pilot. Tragically, he didn't get to drive the car for more than about a year before he was killed in a plane crash in the line of duty. But the car stayed with his family for the next 50 years. His younger brother drove it to high school in Albuquerque. After that, his father, who was also colonel in the Air Force, used it to drive to and from the Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. And then around 1970, the third brother drove the car out here to California. Around 1973, basically put it into storage in a private hangar he had at the San Jose airport. So around 2013, he was looking to move out of the area and was looking to what to do with the car, and that led him to British Sports Cars in San Luis Obispo. And They took the car on and restored it over the next 2 years from the ground up. And it was at that point, after it was restored, that I saw it up for sale. And as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to have it. And I drove down next day and bought it. The great thing about driving this car is, while it looks great, underneath you have a real TR3 Roadster sports car, and so it's a lot of fun to drive. And it's pretty fast, even compared with a lot of more modern cars on the road today, and people are kind of surprised when they get passed by this car. In this car, everything just seems just right.
you.